Hi guys, this is Barbie and I'm here with Notchurch Church. We're in downtown Ithaca, downtown at the Commons. This is where the kids from Cornell University and Ithaca gather. And I want to wish you all a happy Easter. And I want to tell you one of my Easter stories. But before I do, I want to tell you an experience that Tammy and I had a couple months ago. We went to the theater to see Life of Pi, and it was in 3D, and it was our girls' date, and we were excited. And Tammy went downstairs to get tickets while I went upstairs and got popcorn and pop and got us ready to go in. Well, Tammy called the week before to get movie times. And so we get our tickets and we get in there, oh man, it's already started. So we sit down and we put on our 3D glasses and man, we're eating our popcorn and drinking our pop and trying to figure out what's going on as we've come in. Just, we thought we'd come in maybe the end of the advertisements, but not at the beginning of the movie for sure, but we got there that late. So we're watching it and the movie's good and it's somewhat captivating and then it's over. Then it just ends. And then we paid $427 to go into that movie because movie prices today. So I look at my watch and I'm like, what the crap? It's been like 62 minutes. I don't understand. And we go out and we look down at our ticket times. We thought we were at the 5:30 showing, right? Well, it was the 3:30 or the 4 o'clock showing or something. We got in there was only like an hour left. We'd come in right in the middle of the movie anyway. And so we show them our tickets and tell them what we did. And so we go back so we can watch the first half of the movie. Now we enjoyed the second half and it was good, but really wasn't all that clear. So we went back and we watched the beginning. If you see it from the beginning to the middle, really, it was like, and while it was a good story before, it was an amazing story afterwards. And so we were glad that we saw it that way so we could even see that, man, on this side we don't see the whole story, but there is one. And so let me tell you about my Easter story. Now we know the story of Christ. Sometimes things are too familiar to us. So let me tell you about my Easter story. Several years ago I was a hospice chaplain and I got paperwork on my desk to go see a young guy and it already troubled me when I saw his age. And so I go to the nursing home and I see this man in his 50s. And at that point he's barely responsive and I introduced myself to him, and I see that he doesn't have a pastor, and he doesn't have a church background. He's a musician, and he worked for the city, and what a great guy as I got to visit with him a little at a time as he could talk. And I met his wife, who was just a year or two older than me, and we struck up a friendship and a camaraderie as she walked this walk with her husband and their teenage daughter who dropped out of school to care for her daddy as he went through stage 4 cancer until it couldn't be done in the home anymore. And his family wrapped themselves around my heart, and I was wrapped around their hearts, and they just touched me so much. And I got to actually be there and walk him home whenever he got ready to die, and as he was dying, I got to be there and be with that family and pray with them as he crossed over from this life to the next. And he left behind these daughters, these beautiful daughters that were so crazy about their daddy, right? And this incredibly strong, beautiful wife. And she and I talked about when we would go have hash browns, and I did his funeral, and the message that God gave me was about happily ever after, and that there is a happily ever after, that we're all in the middle of a story, and it's our story. We can't live somebody else's. We have to live our story. And so that's the message I delivered to this family, was about happily ever after. At the end of the funeral, I gave Fanny, his wife, a Cinderella book about happily ever after. And so for the first year in hospice after someone dies, we stay with the family. And so Fanny and I would stay in touch, and I knew she was in school and going to go take care of people that had gone through exactly what she had gone through. And almost a year to the date of Eula's passing, I get a phone call. And it's one of the daughters, and she tells me, Barbie, I just wanted to ask you to pray. Mom's been killed in a car wreck in Georgia. These kids that had just buried their father just lost their mother less than a year later. She'd gone away with her best friend on a road trip. They called it their Thelma and Louise trip. Fanny had never seen the ocean, and she'd been grieving so. And she went there and she got in the ocean, and she said, I can go now, I'm happy. And she got to see the ocean. And then when they were going to come back to Oklahoma, they were on their way to Walmart to get yarn for Fanny to knit on the way home, and she loved to knit. She ran a stop sign and she was hit and she was killed instantly. And so I go, right, it's 10 o'clock at night when I find this out. I throw on my clothes and I go and I meet with the daughters there in the home, and I see these incredibly strong girls. And it's amazing what they've just been through, and now they're all of a sudden going through again. And the next thing I know, I'm in a funeral home with them as they're having to pick out a casket for their mother. Something kids should never have to do. And they're having to figure out how to get her body from one state to the next. Something families you think should never have to do, such sorrow. And it was Easter time. And so I looked at doing her funeral and bringing a message of hope and resurrection to this family. Lord, how? How do I talk about hope and faith to this family that's just lost so much? We figure out when we can get our body back to Oklahoma and when we can schedule the funeral, and behold, it falls on Good Friday. Really, God? On Good Friday? They're going to put their mother to rest? How am I supposed to bring this message? How is it supposed to impact them in a way that shows them your resurrection life and your power and your goodness and your glory? And he took me back to that first Good Friday and what it looked like too. It looked pretty dark too for Mary, for the disciples. That's what that first Good Friday looked like too. But thank God that wasn't the end of the story. That wasn't the end of this family's story. And the Lord gave me a message to do at the funeral and to talk about the thread of love that God weaves all throughout our life as he's bringing about this beautiful plan, this beautiful story that brings us all together in this patchwork that only he can create. And so the morning of the funeral, I'm preparing and I have a heavy heart, and all of a sudden the Lord shows me a picture of my son's baby blanket. And my son at the time is 18 years old and very far from home from me, and he shows me this picture of the baby blanket and tells me to use that as an illustration at the funeral. So I go on Good Friday and I deliver this message to this grieving family. And I hold up this baby blanket and I talk about how God is weaving all of those events together with his love. And it brings the message together. And I go from there to the cemetery and I do another message. And I've got that baby blanket in my car. And the Lord keeps telling me to give it to Heather, one of the daughters, Fanny's oldest daughter. And I said, I can't do. There's Brittany too, and Tammy, and no, I can't do that, Lord. And Susie, how could I choose which? And I just kept seeing Heather's face, and I was to give her that baby blanket. But Lord, that's my son's baby blanket. It's still got Similac on it. That's 16 years old. I can't give that. I've held that with. Give it to Heather. And so I get there to the cemetery and I'm doing the funeral and it's all over and people are walking away and Heather's still there and I'm just about to throw up if I don't go get that baby blanket and give it to Heather. So I go get the baby blanket that I use as an illustration and I give it to Heather and she tries to refuse it. I can't take that. That was your son's. And I said, I know, I don't want to give it to you. But God wants me to. Have it, please. Do with it what you will, but you're supposed to have this. And I believe it was white with blue stripes or blue. I said, you're supposed to have this. And so she took it. And 2 weeks later, a few weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. She was pregnant at the time that her mom went home to be with Jesus. When I did that service and when God gave me the illustration of a baby blanket and how somehow he's working all those things together for good, that in the midst of that family's sorrow, God was already weaving together life. He was already in her womb. And he showed it to her before with the baby. That's how big he is, and that's the power of his resurrection. And that's the kind of story he has in each one of our lives. When we lay down the religion, we lay down the rules, and we just look to him and let him live in us and through us, knowing that he loves us beyond measure. And he was died, and he was killed and resurrected so we could live a glorified life in him, for him, and through him. Happy Easter, and don't settle for anything less than your own Easter resurrection story. God bless you all. Amen.